It was supposed to be an ordinary flight, just another peaceful journey through the sky. The sun was shining brightly above the clouds, painting the horizon in soft gold and orange shades. Passengers were chatting, laughing, and settling into their seats, unaware that this flight would soon turn into a story the world would never forget. Among them sat a 19-year-old American student named Emily Carter. She was flying home after attending an aviation seminar, a topic she loved deeply. She never imagined that everything she had learned would soon become the only hope for hundreds of lives. As the plane soared above 30,000 feet, everything seemed calm. The engines hummed steadily, the flight attendants served drinks, and children watched cartoons on their screens. Emily sat by the window, gazing at the endless sky, dreaming about one day becoming a pilot herself. She smiled quietly, unaware that destiny had already chosen her moment. Inside the cockpit, the experienced captain, a man in his 50s, was chatting casually with his co-pilot. They had flown together many times before. It was a routine flight from New York to Denver, nothing unusual, just another safe journey through clear weather. But in a matter of seconds, everything changed. Suddenly, the captain's hand slipped from the throttle. His voice faded mid-sentence. The co-pilot turned toward him, confused, and saw the captain's face go pale. His eyes rolled back. "Captain, Captain," he shouted, but there was no response. The captain's body slumped sideways, hitting the controls. The warning alarms instantly blared through the cockpit. Red lights flashed, and the plane tilted slightly to one side. The co-pilot grabbed the controls and shouted into the intercom, calling for help. "Medical emergency in the cockpit. Captain is down." The flight attendants rushed forward, panic written all over their faces. They tried to pull the captain out of the seat, calling for any doctors on board. The passengers began to stir, whispering anxiously as the plane trembled slightly. Emily looked up, sensing that something was wrong. The plane dipped for just a moment before stabilizing, but the tension in the air grew thicker by the second. A mother clutched her child tightly, an elderly man pressed his hands together in silent prayer. The flight attendants were trying to calm people, but fear was spreading fast. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot was sweating. He was young, and though trained, he had never faced a situation like this alone. The captain had suffered a heart attack, he wasn't breathing. A flight attendant attempted CPR, but it wasn't working. The co-pilot tried to keep his focus on the instruments, but the stress was overwhelming. The plane began to descend slightly below its safe altitude. "Mayday, Mayday," he called into the radio, voice trembling. "This is Flight 392 requesting immediate medical and technical assistance. Captain is incapacitated." Air traffic control responded quickly, but the situation was getting out of control. The co-pilot's voice cracked as he spoke, his hands shaking on the yoke. The aircraft was stable for now, but any mistake could lead to disaster. Back in the cabin, Emily heard the announcement. Her heart began to race. She looked around. People were crying, holding hands, whispering prayers. But she wasn't frozen by fear. Instead, something sparked inside her. She had spent years studying flight dynamics and practicing in simulators. She wasn't a licensed pilot yet, but she knew aircraft systems, controls, and emergency procedures better than most passengers ever would. Emily stood up, her knees trembling slightly. A flight attendant saw her and said, "Ma'am, please stay seated." But Emily replied firmly, "I think I can help. I've trained in flight simulators. Please, let me talk to the co-pilot." Her voice carried a mix of fear and determination. The attendant hesitated, unsure what to do, but something in Emily's tone convinced her. She picked up the interphone and spoke to the cockpit. Moments later, Emily was escorted forward. Every pair of eyes followed her as she walked down the narrow aisle, hundreds of passengers watching silently, their hope pinned on a 19-year-old girl. The murmurs spread through the cabin. "She's going to help fly the plane. Is she really a pilot? Oh my God, I hope she can do it." When Emily stepped into the cockpit, her breath caught in her throat. The captain was slumped on the floor, and the co-pilot's face was pale with stress. The control panels glowed with warning lights. The radio crackled with static and urgent voices from air traffic control. It was chaos, but somehow, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She took a deep breath and said, "I've studied flight controls. Tell me what you need." The co-pilot looked at her, disbelief in his eyes. "You've trained before?" he asked quickly. Emily nodded. "Simulator training, several hundred hours. I know the basics of Boeing systems." The co-pilot hesitated for just a moment, then gave a small nod. All right, sit here, I'll need your help. Emily sat in the captain's seat, her hands trembling as she placed them on the controls. The plane shuddered slightly, caught in turbulence. She glanced at the altimeter, 28,000 feet and dropping slowly. The co-pilot was managing communications while trying to stabilize the aircraft. ATC, we have assistance on board. Repeat, we have assistance. Copy that, the voice from air traffic control replied. We're routing you to the nearest airport. Maintain heading 270, descend to 10,000 feet. We'll guide you all the way down. Emily's heart was pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears, but she forced herself to focus. Okay, she whispered, gripping the yoke. Pitch angle, steady, reduce throttle slightly, wings level. The co-pilot glanced at her, shocked by her composure. Despite being terrified, she sounded like she belonged there. As minutes passed, she followed every instruction carefully. Her mind recalled lessons from her training, how to read the instruments, how to adjust flaps, how to correct a descent. She worked in sync with the co-pilot, checking gauges and communicating with air traffic control. Each second felt like an eternity, but she refused to lose focus. In the cabin, the tension was unbearable. Some passengers cried quietly, others clutched hands, whispering prayers. Through the intercom, the co-pilot made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation, but we are under control. We have a trained passenger assisting in the cockpit. Please remain calm and stay seated. When Emily's voice came over the speakers for the first time, it sent chills through the cabin. This is Emily Carter. We're doing everything possible to keep the flight safe. Please trust us. The calm in her tone gave people hope. Even though she was just a teenager, her words carried the strength of a leader. Meanwhile, storm clouds were forming ahead. Air traffic control rerouted the plane slightly to avoid turbulence, but sudden gusts rocked the aircraft. Emily gritted her teeth and adjusted the controls, remembering her simulator sessions. I've got it, she said softly. We're stable. The co-pilot gave her a quick nod of respect. You're doing great, Emily. Just keep her steady. Minutes felt like hours. The descent continued, smooth but tense. Ground crews were preparing emergency teams on the runway. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the landing path, ready for any outcome. The world outside was unaware that a 19-year-old student was in command of a commercial jet. As the airport came into sight through the clouds, Emily's hands were slick with sweat. The co-pilot took over some systems while she managed the controls. Flaps to 20, he said. Speed 160 knots. She nodded, adjusting carefully. The runway lights shimmered in the distance like a promise. Her heart raced. This was the final test. Okay, Emily, the co-pilot said softly, you're doing perfect. Just keep her lined up. She focused intensely. The radio crackled again. Flight 392, you are cleared to land. Wind at 10 knots, runway 27 right. Roger that, she replied, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Cleared to land. As the ground drew closer, the cabin went silent. Not a sound, no crying, no whispers. Every soul on board held their breath. Emily felt the vibration through her seat as the wheels extended. She eased the throttle back, guiding the plane gently toward the runway. The moment the plane's tires touched down, there was a jolt, and then a smooth, rolling thud. The aircraft slowed, gliding safely along the tarmac until it came to a full stop. For a split second, there was silence. And then, applause erupted. People screamed, cried, hugged each other in disbelief and joy. Emily leaned back, her hands trembling uncontrollably now. The co-pilot looked at her, eyes shining with gratitude. You just saved hundreds of lives, he said softly. She let out a shaky laugh, tears filling her eyes. I just did what I had to do. Outside, emergency teams rushed to the plane. The captain was taken to the hospital immediately, while the passengers slowly disembarked, each one looking at Emily with tears of gratitude. Some called her a miracle. Others called her a hero. But Emily just stood quietly by the cockpit door, heart still racing, realizing that she had lived the most extraordinary moment of her life. News spread around the world within hours. Headlines read, 19-year-old student lands passenger jet after captain collapses, hundreds saved. People called her brave, fearless, and inspiring. Aviation experts called it a once-in-a-lifetime act of courage. But Emily didn't see herself as a hero. When reporters asked how she stayed calm, she simply said, because I believed someone had to be. If I panicked, everyone would panic. So, I just remembered everything I learned and trusted myself. That day, a 19-year-old girl's passion, courage, and knowledge turned into something extraordinary, a miracle in the sky. The plane jolted slightly, just enough to make drinks quiver in their cups and hearts skip a beat. A low, uneasy vibration rippled through the cabin, followed by a sharp beeping from somewhere up front. At first, most passengers thought it was turbulence. A few nervous laughs broke out, someone muttered that this always happens during long flights, and a child giggled at the sound. But then the plane tilted, just slightly, but enough that coffee spilled and a few gasps filled the air. The cheerful murmur of conversation vanished into a cold silence. A strange, heavy sound echoed from above, the deep groan of engines adjusting, the shrill cry of alarms cutting through the hum of flight. The seatbelt sign lit up. The intercom crackled. No one said a word. Somewhere near the middle of the plane, a baby began to cry. The mother tried to hush her, her own eyes wide and uncertain. Then, without warning, the plane dipped again, and the sensation of falling, that sickening drop in the stomach, swept through everyone at once. Panic spread like fire. A few people screamed, others grabbed at the armrests, white-knuckled, breathless. The air filled with gasps, prayers, and choked sobs. A man in the back shouted for help, another clutched his chest in fear. The attendants rushed down the aisle, faces pale but voices steady, repeating over and over, "Please remain calm, everyone, please stay seated." But calm was gone. The cabin was chaos, the kind of chaos that only happens when everyone realizes they might not make it back to the ground. One of the flight attendants stumbled slightly as the plane rocked. She steadied herself on a seat and turned toward the cockpit, her voice trembling as she pressed the interphone. Her tone changed, sharp, urgent, desperate. "Flight deck, we're losing altitude. What's happening up there?" The response came through faintly, a man's voice, strained, gasping for breath. Then silence, only the endless alarm and the growing panic behind her. In that moment, every second felt like an eternity. The oxygen seemed to thin. The world outside the windows, endless sky, endless white clouds, looked peaceful, mocking the terror inside. A man whispered the Lord's Prayer. A woman clutched a small cross in her hands. Others closed their eyes, waiting, helpless. It was chaos in its purest form, the sound of human fear echoing at 30,000 feet. And then, from the middle of the plane, a young voice cut through the noise. "Calm, but strong. I can help." For a second, no one reacted. The passengers nearest turned toward the sound. A girl, barely 19, her face pale but her eyes burning with determination. She rose from her seat, steadying herself against the shaking aisle. "I've trained on flight simulators," she said louder, her voice carrying over the panic. "I can help." Dozens of eyes turned toward her at once. Shock, disbelief, hope. A flight attendant hurried over. "Ma'am, please sit down," she said automatically, fear and procedure battling in her voice. But the young woman didn't back down. "Please listen," she said firmly, "I know how to handle basic flight controls. I can help the co-pilot." Her voice wavered just slightly at the end, but her eyes stayed fixed, steady. The kind of steady that only comes when someone has decided, truly decided, to act. The attendant hesitated. The plane jolted again, a violent shake that sent trays clattering to the floor. Someone screamed. The attendant's radio buzzed with static, a panicked voice from the cockpit calling for help. That was enough. She turned to the girl. "Come with me." As the two of them moved forward, time seemed to slow. Every pair of eyes followed. The mother with the baby, the old man clutching his rosary, the businessman frozen. Mid-prayer, all of them stared, as if willing this one young stranger to save them. Some whispered, "God bless her." Others just watched, breathless. The narrow aisle felt endless, the lights flickering slightly as turbulence shook the aircraft again. Emily, that was her name, could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears, but she forced herself to stay calm. Every step felt heavy, every sound, the alarms, the crying, the rumble of the engines, blended into a dull roar behind her. She thought of her training simulator back home, the way she used to sit in her room practicing takeoffs and landings for fun. She had spent hundreds of hours learning how a plane behaves in the air, but never, not once, had she imagined this. Not hundreds of lives, not real pressure, not real sky beneath her. When they reached the cockpit door, the attendant pounded on it. "It's me, open up." A moment later, the door unlocked with a faint click. The attendant pushed it open, and both froze. Inside, the captain was slumped over, completely unresponsive, his hands hanging limp beside the controls. The co-pilot was struggling to keep the plane level, sweat pouring down his face. Red warning lights flashed across the panels. He turned, eyes wild, as the attendant helped drag the captain back. "Medical emergency?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The co-pilot nodded frantically. "Heart attack, I think. I can't do this alone much longer." He looked at Emily, not sure what to make of the teenager standing there. "Who are you?" "I'm Emily Carter. I've trained on simulators. I know Boeing systems, not real flight hours, but I can help." She said it fast, breathless, terrified of wasting even a second. The co-pilot stared for a beat, then glanced back at the flashing instruments. The plane dipped again. He made a split-second decision. "All right, sit down. Co-pilot seat. Strap in." Emily slid into the seat, hands trembling as she buckled herself in. The yoke felt heavy, real, alive beneath her fingers. The vibrations of the engines pulsed through the metal. "Okay," she whispered to herself, "focus." Her mind snapped into the rhythm of her training. Check the horizon indicator, monitor altitude, correct the pitch. She placed her hands on the controls gently. "What's our current altitude?" she asked. "Dropping through 27,000, the co-pilot replied, eyes darting between instruments. "We're losing pressure in the left engine." Emily adjusted the trim slightly. The nose lifted, just enough to stabilize the fall. The alarms quieted by one note. The co-pilot looked at her, surprised. "You've done this before, on a computer," she said, her voice shaking, "but it's all the same physics." The radio crackled to life, air traffic control trying to re-establish contact. The co-pilot grabbed the mic. "This is Flight 392, Captain incapacitated, I have limited control. I've got assistance from a trained passenger. Requesting immediate guidance." The voice from ground control came fast, clipped, calm. "Copy that 392. Stay steady, we're tracking you. Who's assisting you?" Emily leaned toward the radio. "Emily Carter, civilian, student pilot in training." There was a pause. Then, "All right Emily, you're doing great. We'll talk you through this. Keep your wings level and maintain your current heading." The co-pilot glanced at her again, a faint spark of relief in his eyes. "Okay, Emily, let's do this together." The plane trembled again, but this time she didn't flinch. Her hands gripped the controls, firm now, not shaking. She adjusted the throttle, feeling the response, the massive weight of the jet obeying her touch. She thought of all the nights she'd spent in her simulator chair, pretending to be in command of a real aircraft. Only this wasn't pretend anymore. This was life and death. In the cabin, passengers clung to every movement. Some thought they felt the plane level out a little. The attendants whispered updates through tears, "They've got help in the cockpit." It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark hope. Emily's mind raced through her memory, the flight dynamics she'd studied, the emergency procedures she'd memorized just because she loved aviation. She heard her old instructor's voice in her head, reminding her, "Always fly the plane first. No matter what happens, fly the plane." She repeated it under her breath like a prayer. "Fly the plane, fly the plane." The co-pilot guided her step by step. "All right, start bringing down the throttle just a little. Keep an eye on the vertical speed." "Got it," she replied, fingers moving across switches and levers she'd only ever seen on a screen. The aircraft responded smoothly, as if it trusted her. The radio buzzed again. "Flight 392, you're looking stable. Good job. Begin a slow descent to 10,000 feet. You're cleared toward the emergency route." Emily took a deep breath and began the descent. The engines hummed softer, the nose lowered slightly, the horizon straightened out. For a moment, the chaos outside faded, no screaming, no panic, just the hum of flight and the steady breathing of two people fighting to keep everyone alive. The co-pilot looked at her again, his voice quieter now. "You really do know what you're doing." Emily didn't look away from the instruments. "I'm doing what I've always dreamed of. Just, not like this." Outside, clouds drifted past the windows like slow rivers of white. The light from the sun hit them softly, almost peaceful. Inside, Emily's focus never broke. Her hands stayed steady, her breathing controlled, her eyes locked on the gauges. She wasn't just a teenager anymore. She was a pilot, at least for this moment. In the cabin, people began to calm down as the turbulence eased. The attendants moved slowly through the aisles, checking on passengers. Some people started to cry from relief. Others simply stared out the windows, whispering thanks. One man murmured, "Whoever that girl is, God bless her." Minutes stretched into forever, but the plane remained stable. Emily followed every instruction from ground control, every order from the co-pilot, perfectly. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, precise, confident. Every word carried the weight of hundreds of lives depending on her. The alarms that had once screamed in chaos now fell silent, replaced by the rhythmic beeping of stable systems. The co-pilot exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "You just saved this flight," he whispered. Emily shook her head, her voice soft. "Not yet. Let's get everyone home first." The flight attendant guided her swiftly through the narrow aisle. Every passenger turned as the young woman passed, eyes wide, breaths held. The chaos in the cabin had softened to a frightened hush, as if everyone understood that something extraordinary was about to happen. The engines rumbled beneath their feet, the floor vibrating with power and danger. Emily could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her chest, faster and faster, until it drowned out everything else. When the cockpit door opened, a wave of heat and alarm sounds hit her face. Red lights blinked across the control panel like frantic signals. The captain lay unconscious, slumped against the side, his headset dangling uselessly from one ear. The co-pilot was gripping the yoke with both hands, his knuckles white, eyes darting between instruments. Sweat dripped down his temple, his voice cracked as he tried to call air traffic control. "This is Flight 392, Captain incapacitated, losing altitude, requesting," the words cut off when he saw her. "I'm Emily," she said quickly, her breath short. "I've trained on simulators. I can help." He hesitated, staring at her, a teenage girl in jeans and a sweatshirt, trembling but determined. Another alarm screamed. The plane jolted sharply to the left. There was no more time for doubt. "Strap in," he ordered. "We're doing this together." Emily slid into the captain's seat. Her hands shook as she gripped the controls, real controls, heavy and alive beneath her fingers. She could feel the weight of hundreds of tons of metal and hundreds of lives pressing through the yoke. "Okay," she whispered to herself, "just breathe." She had practiced this feeling before, not the fear, but the focus, in the glow of a computer screen late at night. Now the simulator was real, and failure meant falling from the sky. "Control, this is Flight 392, the co-pilot said into the radio, his voice steadier now. "Assistance from a trained passenger on board. We need immediate step-by-step guidance." Static answered, then a calm, steady voice broke through. "Flight 392, this is Denver Center. Copy your situation, maintain heading 270. You're in good hands." "What's the name of the assisting passenger?" "Emily Carter," the co-pilot replied. "She's trained on simulators, knows Boeing systems." "Copy that, Emily, we'll talk you through it. Keep calm, you're doing great already." She swallowed hard. Her mouth was dry, but she managed to answer, "Understood." The co-pilot glanced at her, a flash of respect in his eyes. "All right, Emily, you've got control." She tightened her grip. The yoke felt like stone. The horizon tilted outside the windshield, the sky half blue, half white cloud, and the plane was descending too fast. Her brain screamed numbers at her: pitch angle, vertical speed, engine thrust. She adjusted the trim slightly, feeling the resistance ease. The aircraft steadied, the descent slowing. The co-pilot nodded. "Good, very good." The radio crackled again. "Flight 392, descend to flight level 250. Keep wings level. You're doing fine, Emily." She repeated the words out loud, forcing her voice to stay even. "Descend to 250. Wings level." She eased the throttle, watching the altitude indicator drop slowly. The alarms softened. For the first time since she entered the cockpit, the noise wasn't deafening, it was manageable. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the cockpit in a golden glow. Emily took one quick glance at the view, endless sky, calm, cruelly beautiful, then forced her eyes back to the instruments. "Focus," she whispered. The co-pilot checked the systems, speaking to her as if they'd been a team for years. "Okay, left engine's good, hydraulics stable. Let's watch the yaw." He reached to switch off a flashing light. "You're doing amazing, kid." She almost smiled but didn't dare to. "Don't call me kid right now," she said under her breath. He chuckled despite the chaos. "Fair point." The radio came alive again. "Flight 392, turn left heading 260. Winds moderate. You'll encounter light turbulence ahead." "Turbulence," she repeated. The word hit her stomach like a stone. She remembered the simulator exercises, how easy it was when the ground was imaginary. But this was real. Real wind, real sky, real fear. She tightened her seatbelt. The first jolt came like a punch, bouncing the plane slightly. The second was stronger. The horizon outside swung upward and then down. Emily gasped, gripping the yoke. Stay with it, the co-pilot said quickly. Counter with small corrections. Don't fight the wind, ride it. She nodded, eyes locked on the artificial horizon. Ride it, ride it. Her voice was a whisper, but her hands obeyed perfectly. The plane steadied again. The turbulence passed. The cabin behind them was silent, waiting, unaware that a 19-year-old girl had just conquered the wind. Air traffic control spoke again, calm and steady. Beautiful work, Flight 392. You're stabilized. Begin gradual descent to 10,000 feet. We're preparing an emergency runway. Roger that, Emily said. Her voice sounded strange in her ears, confident, sure, like it belonged to someone older. She could feel the pressure building behind her eyes, tears she refused to let fall. She couldn't break now, not when everyone was counting on her. Minutes turned into long stretches of silence. The instruments hummed quietly. The steady rhythm of flight returned. Emily focused on every sound, every vibration. The co-pilot coordinated with ground control, reading numbers and weather data. She followed every command precisely: adjust flaps, manage throttle, correct yaw. Her movements became smoother, instinctive, like muscle memory from a dream she'd lived 100 times. At 15,000 feet, a warning light blinked again, crosswind ahead. The voice on the radio came fast. Emily, you'll have gusts from the northwest. Keep your nose pointed slightly into the wind. Copy, she said. The plane began to shake again. The clouds outside turned dark gray, rippling with storm light. Lightning flashed somewhere in the distance. For a moment, the sky looked alive. The co-pilot glanced at her. You all right? Yeah, she whispered. Just scared. He smiled faintly. Good. Scared means you're careful. Let's bring her home. The runway was still miles away, invisible beneath the clouds. Air traffic control guided them step by step. You're approaching the glide path. Reduce speed to 150 knots. Flaps 10. Emily's fingers moved automatically. The plane slowed. The hum of the engines deepened. She could feel the weight of the descent now, the rush of air changing pitch as they fell toward the earth. Her pulse pounded in her neck, but her voice stayed calm. Flaps 10. Speed 150. Good, the controller said. Now keep your rate of descent steady. You're lined up perfectly. For a brief second, Emily dared to look over her shoulder. She couldn't see the passengers, but she imagined them, hundreds of faces pressed against windows, eyes closed, hands clasped. They didn't know her name. They didn't know she was 19. They only knew that someone up front was saving them. As the clouds thinned, the land appeared, green fields, silver rivers, the faint glow of a city in the distance. Then she saw it, the runway. Straight, shining under the sun. So close, and yet so far. Her breathing grew shallow. Okay, she said softly, this is it. The co-pilot nodded. You've got this. Keep your glide slope. Flaps 20. Flaps 20, she repeated. Her voice trembled, but her hands were steady. The plane descended smoothly. Gear down, he said. The mechanical roar of the landing gear echoed through the plane. 3 green lights appeared on the panel. Gear down and locked, she confirmed. The radio came alive one final time. Flight 392, cleared to land. Winds calm. The runway is yours. The words hit her like lightning. Cleared to land. For a heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. Then she exhaled and tightened her grip. Here we go, she whispered. The ground grew closer. The co-pilot called out numbers. 500 feet, 400, 300. Emily adjusted the nose slightly, her hands moving with precision. 200, 150. The runway rushed up to meet them. She eased the throttle, pulling back gently on the yoke. The main wheels touched first, a deep thud that shook the cabin, then the nose gear came down smooth. The plane rolled along the tarmac, the roar of the engines fading into a low hum. She applied the brakes, steady and firm. The plane slowed more, and then stopped. Silence. For one long, impossible moment, there was only the sound of the engines cooling. Then the cabin erupted in cheers. People clapped, shouted, cried. Some called her name without even knowing it. The co-pilot leaned back in his seat, laughing through tears. You did it, he said. You actually did it. Emily let go of the controls. Her hands were trembling, her face streaked with sweat and tears. She looked out at the runway, bright, solid, real, and finally let herself smile. We did it, she whispered. The radio crackled once more. Beautiful landing, Flight 392. Emergency crews are standing by. Outstanding work, Emily. The world will want to meet you. But at that moment, Emily didn't care about the world. She just sat there, listening to the sound of people clapping behind her, the sound of life, of gratitude, of relief. She had done the impossible. A 19-year-old student who loved flying had saved an entire flight. Outside the window, the sunlight broke fully through the clouds, bathing the plane in gold. It felt like a sign, not from luck, but from courage. And inside the cockpit, Emily Carter finally allowed herself to breathe. The plane's tires kissed the runway with a soft but thunderous thud, the vibration of impact rolling through the cabin like a wave of relief. For a moment, there was silence, the kind of stunned, breathless silence that fills a room when no one knows how to react. Then it hit, a flood of emotion that no one could contain. Applause erupted, spontaneous and roaring. People stood, some cheering, some weeping, others hugging strangers they had never met, their faces streaked with tears and sweat. Relief poured through the cabin like warm sunlight, filling every corner and shadow that had once been darkened by fear. Emily Carter, the 19-year-old student who had just taken control of a commercial jet, her hands still gripping the yoke moments before, leaned back in her seat, trembling. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, echoing through her entire body. Her fingers shook, not from fear anymore, but from the release of tension she had held for what felt like an eternity. The weight of the aircraft was gone, the engines now idling softly, the alarms silenced. She allowed herself the smallest of smiles, a tremulous exhale escaping her lips as she whispered, "We did it." Around her, the cabin was alive with a cacophony of relief. Flight attendants moved quickly but gently, calming passengers still clutching hands and checking on loved ones. Mothers hugged children tightly, sobbing into the backs of their shirts. Elderly men and women clasped each other's hands, muttering prayers of thanks. Strangers embraced strangers, eyes wide and wet with emotion. The sound of laughter and crying mingled, creating a strange, beautiful harmony, the sound of survival. The co-pilot, pale and exhausted, finally exhaled and looked at Emily. His eyes were filled with gratitude, disbelief, and awe. You really did it," he said softly, his voice shaking despite his attempt at composure. Emily shook her head, trying to downplay the enormity of what had just happened. "We did it," she said again, though she knew, deep down, that she alone had carried the moment that had saved hundreds of lives. Outside the plane, emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights flashing in steady patterns, waiting for any sign of trouble. Fire trucks and ambulances, crews standing ready, were relieved to see the plane rolling to a calm stop. For them, the landing had been tense, a test of every emergency protocol they knew. But the plane had touched down with precision, grace, and a courage that was almost unimaginable. News of what had just happened began to spread almost instantly. Passengers who could reach their phones began sending messages, posting updates, live streaming snippets of the relief that poured from the cabin. Headlines were being drafted even before the passengers disembarked. Teen pilot saves hundreds in mid-air crisis, 19-year-old student takes control of jet, lands plane safely, hero in the skies, Emily Carter's incredible courage. Yet for Emily, the headlines were secondary. Right now, she was still trying to process everything, the reality of what she had done settling slowly, like sunlight creeping across a quiet room. Emergency crews approached, asking questions, checking vitals, ensuring the captain and co-pilot were okay, and confirming that all passengers were safe. Emily was gently guided from the cockpit, every step met with applause from the passengers. People cheered her name, some calling out, "Hero! Hero!" Others simply stood, tears streaming down their faces, shaking their heads in disbelief that a teenager could accomplish what professional pilots had trained years to do. Inside the terminal, paramedics took the captain to the hospital. The co-pilot was escorted to speak with airline officials, still pale but alive, and Emily, still in her casual clothes, still trembling, still barely able to comprehend the enormity of the situation, was met with a mix of reporters, cameras, and flashing lights. People wanted interviews, photos, statements. They wanted to know how she had done it, how a 19-year-old student could take control of a fully loaded passenger jet and land it safely without anyone injured. Emily tried to remain calm, but the adrenaline that had kept her steady in the cockpit now surged through her body unchecked. Her hands shook, her voice wavered, and her legs felt like they could give way at any moment. She took a deep breath, trying to answer questions as best she could. I just did what I knew," she said softly, her words carrying a weight far heavier than she had intended. I had to stay calm. I had to fly the plane. That was all I could think about. Reporters pressed further. Did you ever imagine you'd be in this position? One asked, microphone thrust close. Emily shook her head. Never. Not in a million years. But when the time came, I just focused on what I had learned. And I trusted myself. I trusted the co-pilot. And we made it. Everywhere she went, passengers, crew members, and airport staff looked at her differently now. She was no longer just a student. She was a symbol of courage, focus, and resilience. People whispered to each other, awe in their voices. Can you believe she's only 19? If that were me, I'd have panicked. She saved all of us. Even outside, the story was growing. Social media lit up with messages and videos from passengers capturing moments of the landing and her calm demeanor in the cockpit. Clips of her hands gripping the controls, snippets of her instructions over the radio, flashes of her determined expression, went viral within hours. Hashtags appeared. Hashtag hero in the sky, hashtag Emily Carter, hashtag teen pilot saves flight, hashtag real life hero, hashtag courage above clouds. Millions watched, shared, and commented, amazed at the bravery and poise of a young girl who had faced one of the most terrifying experiences imaginable and come out victorious. A television crew arrived to interview Emily. She sat quietly, still processing everything, and when asked about fear, she paused. I was scared, she admitted, voice soft but steady. But fear isn't the enemy. It's what you do with it that matters. You have to focus. You have to act. I had no choice but to try. There was no time to panic. I just had to do what I had practiced and hope it would be enough. Her words resonated far beyond the airport. Experts in aviation praised her ability to remain calm under pressure. Pilots called it remarkable. News anchors repeated her story as an example of courage and presence of mind. But for Emily, the moment wasn't about accolades. It was about the lives she had saved, the people she had brought safely to the ground, and the quiet knowledge that when it mattered most, she had done the right thing. Passengers who had experienced the landing firsthand were still talking about it, shaking their heads in awe. Some recounted the moments of panic when the captain had collapsed, the alarm screaming, the plane tilting in the air. They remembered the hush that fell over the cabin when Emily had stood up, her voice steady despite her age. I can help, she had said. That simple statement had changed everything. Hope had returned in that instant. Airport staff and airline officials held a small ceremony to recognize Emily's bravery. She received commendations, handshakes, and applause. But she remained humble, quietly accepting congratulations and praise, her thoughts drifting back to the cockpit, to the co-pilot, to the hundreds of passengers who had trusted her life in her hands. She knew that heroism wasn't about recognition, it was about action, about courage, about doing what was necessary when no one else could. As the day turned to evening, the story of Flight 392 dominated the news. Social media buzzed with admiration, analysis, and awe. Emily became an overnight symbol of bravery, an icon for young people everywhere. But she remained grounded, a student, a learner, someone who had simply risen to the occasion when fate demanded it. In the quiet moments after the interviews, Emily sat alone in the terminal, looking out at the runway where she had landed the plane. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the tarmac. She thought about the passengers' faces, the fear she had felt, the precise, terrifying seconds in the cockpit. And she smiled faintly, knowing that, despite everything, she had succeeded. She had saved hundreds of lives. Emily's story would be told for years to come. It would inspire books, articles, videos, and social media posts. But for her, the real victory was simple. Hundreds of people were safe because she had remained calm, focused, and courageous in the face of unimaginable pressure. She had taken control of fear, mastered it, and turned it into life-saving action. And as she finally walked out into the cool evening air, the applause and cheers still ringing in her ears, she understood something profound. True heroism isn't about fame. It isn't about headlines or accolades. True heroism is about courage, focus, and the choice to act when the world depends on you most. Emily Carter, at just 19, had become a living testament to that truth. She had stared fear in the face, seized control, and saved hundreds of lives. And the world, now forever changed by her bravery, would never forget it.